Good evening and welcome to week 4. We're walking into week 4, coming out of week 3 for our part 1 participants.
Yes.
Give our greetings.
And we would like to again welcome you from Thunder Bay. I had a nice chat with one of our students from Columbia this week. And I would like to acknowledge that we are recording today from the traditional territory of Fort William First Nation in Mkiwaju.
Yeah, welcome. And looking back on Module 3, so that is a significant module, and I know many of you are probably still working in it. I see some posts were still posted even yesterday, and we ourselves are working through it, reading your posts, and we'll be marking your case studies as we go, and you can find both grades and feedback in the grades section. But just a couple notes on reading what you've been writing in Module 3.1. I know many people commented on the overwhelming number of regulations and responsibilities that the principal has, and we do. We have a significant number of responsibilities, and there's many different types of legislation between ministry guidelines and PPMs and actual Education Act, and then there's other regulations that we're responsible for that are outside of education, for instance OSHA, and some of our Occupational Health and Safety Act, some of our MFIPA is another one, that's our Privacy Act. So there's many pieces of legislation we're responsible for, but the reality of it is we can't know it all in our heads. So it's excellent to have good resources. The Carswell is a fabulous resource for this, and you want to tab some of the things that you find you'll be using fairly daily. I mentioned in a comment to one of our participants that also having really good mentors, and most of your districts will set up a mentorship program for you as a first-year principal or first-year vice principal. If you're fortunate enough to spend some time as a vice principal, you get a really good opportunity to learn, usually under a seasoned leader.
And what's nice about that is they'll bring you in on everything. And one of the students in my part, she had talked about an incident that happened very similar to the case study last week, but she got to actually sit with the principal and watch the whole process unfold. So that's a really important place to have some learning. And for those of you fortunate enough to actually have vice principals in your systems, that is a good place to start.
Yeah, and that mentorship program, we had mentors within our program for both vice principal and when you move to principal. So that person really needs to be someone you're compatible with, you can work with, and is someone that is really a go-to. So when those decisions come, and part of this is learning how to, and the case study really addresses that, learning how to respond to a crisis moment and give yourself pause and time to think. And I think that came up perhaps in some of Denise's posts.
It really did. One of the other things around the legislation piece is your boards will all have policies and procedures which are written to encompass that legislation. Where you may need some of the specifics are when you're doing, say, suspension letters, or if you're looking at exclusion, or sometimes you'll have people that are homeschooling their kids and they'll come in. So there is some policy around that that our board has, but it's based on what's in the Ed Act. The milk policy was one that a lot of people didn't know existed, and some of the people also talked about if you had a Francophone population or a Catholic population, and what was really required to actually bring that forward into a small board. So there was lots of interesting pieces that came up. But the reality is that was a very fat book of about 1,200 pages. And that it changes all the time, so it's always getting adapted. But it's good to know those big ones, and Reg 298 was one that a lot of people referred to in their case study. So, do you want to talk about 2?
Yeah, just the special education legal requirements piece. One of the things of interest, and I noted some people were talking about sort of meeting the needs of students and creating equitable and inclusive environments, and some of the responsibilities that we have around it. There's a really an interesting sort of issue or conflict going on right now in the province regarding special education, and it revolves around the need to balance the human rights and education rights of students with needs with the rights of our workers, our staff, to be safe from violent and work in violent-free workplaces. I'm sure many of you have seen, particularly in our elementary schools, the rise of violence of young children in the classroom. And there's just been a recent WSAB decision that decided that persistent violence, so not the kind that is an incident that sends somebody immediately to the hospital, but the kind that is ongoing, so biting, scratching, hitting, actually produced a decision regarding that it was actually a designation for mental illness. And so those are real concerns that boards are struggling with, and you as a principal will need to think about as you're approaching special education situations and those pieces that might rise with students who may become violent because of their issues. how you balance that with workers' rights as well and ensure that people are feeling heard, included. I've worked through some of it myself in my own schools. I think one of the most important things is to communicate really openly with your staff. Be sure you know where they are, meaning how they're feeling.
Yeah.
If they're overwhelmed, that you're acknowledging that and that you're making changes or decisions around that piece about overwhelmed. The two don't have to be dichotomous, but you do have to consider them.
And having worked in a site once where we had a student that required a lot of support and really had full-time, so it was really 1.3%, I think, support is, or 1.3 full-time. But we had, the full-on Kevlar body armor, but we actually rotated every day through the day. So people only spent a quarter of a day with that particular child, supporting that child. And then we just kind of kept tabs at our weekly meetings, how people were navigating, if we noted, trigger points that were up, things that we noticed that were working or had stopped working, or new things that started working, but really being responsive to thinking about what does a child need and how can we as a staff support that child, but maintaining the safety of your staff and the mental health and well-being of your staff.
And including your staff in that decision making. They are, the folks that support these children are professionals. They've been trained to handle lots of situations, and they usually have worked with lots of children that have many different needs. And so they have a lot of insight. They are professionals that we can rely on, and to include them in those decision-making pieces, because even when things go wrong, if people feel they've been heard and included, you have a much better opportunity to make that go positively in the future. So just some comments on special ed. And that actually goes to the health and safety legislation that comes later on in Module 3 as well. So.
Now, we have seen some people have been tweeting, and I know a few of you had a slight difficulty getting Pam's video up, but I think it's up now. I had sent her the list of everybody's email so she could send you that email. I had a brief chat with her last night, and she said that it had been going well. She was really interested in the conversation that was happening, and she had spent the weekend involved in ceremony in her area. So she said she had a nice weekend. And a very powerful weekend. So for me, that was a nice piece because she had spent the whole week really working and engaging with us that week as it goes on. Now, she just also sent me a link to a podcast that she did. So I'll see if she minds us sharing that. And if she doesn't, I started listening to it last night. It's about 20 minutes. And I think it'd be an interesting listen for people. So what else do I want to... Moving on.
Moving on to Module 4.
So, can I just, I want to segue. I still have a few more to read in 3.3, but I've been reading each one and then responding individually to you. And I noticed there was a thread that was sort of I want to say hidden agenda, but just an underlying thing that came out, which was about building relationships. And a lot of you had identified that what you did and how you interacted with that parent in that moment was either going to kind of be money in the bank, as David Tranter says, to build that relationship, or something that you were probably never going to recover from in a relationship with that parent. So being able to really make those decisions, student safety first, but then how do you communicate that with the parent? Because there's multiple ways. Some of you give verbatim quote and script on this is what I would say and how I would say it. And without, you don't want to placate the parent, but you do want the parent to know, as many of you stated, that their concerns are important and their concerns are your concerns. And right now you had, 400, 700, 2,000 students outside that you need to go make sure there was someone to look after, but you would be with them as soon as you could be with them. And there was some interesting conversation back and forth about, would that help the relationship? Would that not help the relationship? Should we say come back tomorrow? Should we say book an appointment with the secretary? Any of those could work, and any of those could not work. Yeah. It really depends on who the parent is and how they view your interaction with them in that moment. So, and that's also kind of the tricky part of that is there really is no right answer. No. They're all right. It just depends who the parent is and how that's going to work out with you. But I think that the main thing that I got from reading through your answers is the fact that if you are working towards building that positive relationship with the parent and recognizing that how you followed up with the parent was going to either debunk what the parent thought you might do or not do, are really solidify. So that was a critical piece. So I just wanted to preface that as we move into the relationship pieces.
Yeah, we ask you to revisit Simon Sinek, and the reason we do that now is we've had some time to do some learning, some professional growth, some discussion and dialogue with each other. So we ask you to revisit it and give us your thoughts on reflecting again, because it's always a good opportunity if we get the chance to reflect on where we've been. I kind of do this at different points during the year, where we think we're going for next year. But if we don't look back, we don't think about it, then it doesn't add to our growth.
So we're going to have you take a look into the Prescott and Brookfield chapter and thinking about supporting the growth of others. And part of your role of instructional leader and building that community and building capacity in your school, not just with your parents, but with your students, your teachers, and all your staff is a very critical piece for building things as we move forward. And then, I skipped ahead. So Dr. David Tranter is a professor at Lakehead University, and he's also has a position.
He's our mental health lead for
Mental health
Lakehead
lead for
Public
Lakehead.
Schools.
So he has actual regular workshops that teachers and other staff can attend, but we have a short PowerPoint that he put together. And he also wrote...
He has a monograph.
Yes, a monograph with the Minister of
Yeah,
Education.
so you can look up that.
So he and Dr. Don Kerr co-wrote that. And then we get you back into another case study to really thinking about... this is kind of a gleaning exercise. So if you think about somebody who you would like to speak with who's a current administrator, and really have a conversation with them. So you'll be developing 4 or 5 questions, maybe 2 or 3, depending on how broad their answers are. And then thinking about what it is that they do and to build relationships and build their own organization. So I find this like gold. I enjoy reading this section because really you're summarizing colleagues that you know, what is their very best pieces of advice for you. So that being said, you this is the halfway point.
Yeah.
Like after this week, it's
Fantastic.
all downhill. So, and it will go quickly.
Just like the school year is rushing.
So if you're feeling a little overwhelmed or you're maybe slightly feeling like I'm still catching up, that's perfectly all right. Just kind of plunk through. Remember that we ask you to respond to 1 or 2 other people's posts per module. So it's not, don't feel the need to respond to everybody. Okay?
Okay.
All right, so have a great week.
Yes.